He deserves it. The Vikings have the money to do it. Let's get it done. Extend Cam Bynum. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day each and every day. I appreciate you all so very much. Thank you so much to those of you who are new here as well. Maybe you watched me eat wings and decided to check out my show. Hello and welcome. My name is Luke. I'll be your host today. And you can find the show anywhere you find your favorite podcasts, whether it's searching out Locked On Vikings on any podcast listening app, YouTube, or even Amazon Fire and Roku, if you just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and you can get $200 back in bonus bets for any winning $5 bet. Once again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Today is Twitter Tuesday. That means I am answering your questions as submitted to me via Twitter, as well as the Google form in the show notes, or sending an email to lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com. The first question that I am taking today comes from Max, who asks, what are we going to do with all the cap space? What a great question. So the Vikings are sitting at roughly 27.8 mil in cap space right now after the Justin Jefferson extension lowered Jefferson's cap hit because of signing bonus stuff, which is fairly standard procedure. Players want signing bonuses. That's the best way for a player to get paid. That's just take home cash, right? So you might, that might have been part of the negotiation more than it was like a salary cap trick. I think that might have just been part of, upfront money. There it is. Here's your big it would be very strange for a player to sign a big extension without there being a big signing bonus on it in this day and age and the way that contracts are negotiated. That said, they've got a bunch of cap space this year. What do you do with it? I can think of two reasonable ideas. You could throw in whatever random little free agents you want to, but if you look at the free agents that are out there, nobody's particularly exciting, and nobody would be expensive either. Sure, bring in some bodies. Who cares? I'll be pretty much for it, whoever. But nobody's going to cost a lot of money to even put a dent in this space that they have. So there's two ideas. One is to extend Cam Bynum. I think this is a very good idea, and I think that they should do it. I think they can afford it. It's a great time to do it. He's in a contract year. The second is extend Christian Darrisaw a year early. I don't think Darrisaw would come to the table. I don't think he should come to the table on that because he probably stands to gain a lot more money next year, and extending a year early, they tried to do it with Jefferson, and I think Jefferson was a bit more of an exception than the norm. Not a bit, a lot more of the exception than the norm. I would be pretty surprised to hear Darrisaw getting an extension. Now, next year, all for it. That's going to be the big story of the offseason. But for now, we can extend Cam Bynum. Look, Bynum and Metellus are your safeties for the future, right? Metellus is already under contract for the next couple of years. Get Bynum under contract. Then Harrison Smith can retire and do whatever. Lewis Cine, a lot of people asked about Lewis Cine. Not sure if he makes the team. Right? He's got to earn that now. I think that's genuinely in question. If he has a bad camp in preseason, I think he gets cut. I think he has to have a good preseason to not get cut, which is in the cards, sure. But it's not a given, even though he's a first round pick, right? Dallas Turner, that's a given. He can have a horrible preseason. He ain't getting cut. We're sticking by him. I think the road is kind of run out for Cine. But Harrison Smith retires. Cine doesn't work out. You still have two starting safeties. I really want to preserve that idea. Plus, Bynum has just evolved into such a smart player, such a smart high safety that has the range and the vision to do what you need him to do. With Metellus as a more of a Swiss Army knife player, right, that can go all around the formation, that gives you a secondary, or the back end of the secondary, you've got those bases covered. It's a good state of affairs, and I think it's worth preserving. Plus, it's not going to be that expensive. Safety contracts are not exactly exploding. And I honestly think that safety is a really undervalued position. Safety is important. If your safety does not do the right thing, that is the worst consequence, right? If your corner messes up, it could be a big play or it could be a 5-yard catch that maybe they could have prevented. If your safety messes up, if they mess up in the run fit, that's probably a touchdown because they're the last guy. And a lot of the long touchdowns that you see, it comes down to, could that safety make the tackle or not? That, if you have a guy that can make that tackle, and like I trust Metellus for sure in that. Bynum, I think he's been good enough, I'll say, at that. But also like in coverage, a guy that can, notch 2 interceptions in that big San Francisco game in a big moment, with the season kind of being resurrected through him. And that's far from the only time he's like exploded and like made a bunch of plays. I think he's got enough good games in him, and it'll cost you, like, if you look at the contracts that safeties are working with now, I don't think you're paying $20 million a year like Antoine Winfield made or like Derwin James is making. I think you're probably paying more of like a Kyle Duggar, Buda Baker kind of contract, which is like $14 million a year. Structure it however you're going to structure it and all that stuff. But I think that's, and you could pay that just straight up, right? And still have plenty of cap space. But obviously you probably would have the signing bonus and the classic Briz structure, which is how he does all of his contracts. And it's part of a larger strategy. It's just worth it. So that's what I think they should do with the cap space, or it'll roll over, which brings me to the next question, which comes from Nolan M, who asks, can you explain what it means for cap to roll over in the next season? I see some online debate over what to do with our remaining cap, and I don't understand how signing one-year deals for Renfrow or Kareem Hunt would lead to less cap next season. Does having unused cap actually net you more cap space next season than using your remaining cap to sign one-year contracts? Okay, so you're on to a very weird cognitive thing that happens to us right now. Money right now isn't all that valuable because it can't be spent on anybody more exciting than like Hunter Renfrow, who I guess is good, but might be washed, or like same with Kareem Hunt. Next year, cap space can be spent on all kinds of exciting people. It can be anything. It's a mystery box, right? So it's a lot more exciting to have that, to save that money for a more robust free agency pool, or to pay Christian Darrisaw, do whatever you want to do with it. So I think that's the logic, but it is kind of funny because now you're just sitting with it in a hole in your pocket. You're going to spend it on nobody and then spend it later. The way cap rolls over is it's dollar for dollar. You have, I think it's mostly dollar for dollar. There might be like exceptions somewhere where it'll nickel and dime, but like it's pretty much dollar for dollar. You have 20 million that you didn't spend right now. It raises your salary ceiling. So you can, if the salary cap is 280 mil for everybody else, but you have 20 mil from last year you didn't spend, congratulations. You may now have a $300,000 or $300 million salary cap. That's roughly the way that it works. There's a lot more other details and stuff you probably don't need to worry about, but having unused cap doesn't net you more space. No, I think the idea is that it's like you can spend it on more exciting players, but like those players are still like the premier free agents. And we talk about it every year in March that like the big ticket guys are never the deals, right? Those are never the efficient usages of that. And the Vikings are going to be really active in free agency either way. So I'm not too worried about that rolling over. And I think that's actually kind of inefficient. You're dealing with a way restricted salary cap right now to have a bigger one later. But you're just deferring money. Like if you traded a first rounder this year for a first rounder next year, the first rounder next year is the depreciated asset, right? We like teams value it down a whole round. Why would cap space be any different? Deferring it, waiting to spend it sucks. Your guys get a year older. They get a year more expensive. Contracts get up, right? Like, there is a sense of urgency to all of these things. You get a year closer to the end of your time as GM or as head coach. So waiting a year sucks, and you're just kind of sitting on it. That's not great. Scene Season asks, how do you personally feel about our cornerback room? Who do you expect to make the roster, and who is the best DB overall, in your opinion? It's hard to not say Harrison Smith, just kind of out of a default, although, like, look, he's old. I get it. In terms of who the corners are, a lot of people asked, like, what about like Dwight McGlothern and all that? So in terms of actual corners, Byron Murphy, I think is like the only real true lock. And then Mekhi Blackmon, just off of being a second year, like top 100 pick, like probably a lock as well. Then you have a Caleb Evans and Andrew Booth. Very probable, right? They could have catastrophe preseasons and then get cut in Kyrie Jackson. So there's 5 right there. And then you kind of say, okay, Shaq Griffin, or does Shaq Griffin fall away the way Joejuan Williams did and get cut? I don't know if I see that happening. I think he is a pretty good bet to make the team, but the only other corners on the team are Najee Thompson, who's got a pretty good claim to the roster on special teams, but I wouldn't really count him toward the corner group. Like, he's a special teamer. Jalen Williams, practice squad guy. Dwight McGlothern, love him for the practice squad. AJ Green, call him a practice squatter. That's, I guess, the way I see that room breaking out right now. But in terms of who is the best DB, probably Byron Murphy. Maybe Metellus if you want to value versatility. Like, if being versatile is part of being the quote-unquote best DB, then I think Metellus has a pretty good argument there. But otherwise, I probably give it to Byron Murphy. He's a very good corner, and the defense sorely missed him when he went down last year in December. I've got a lot more questions. Boy, I spent too long on those, so we are going to have to speed it up coming up next. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And it's America's #1 sportsbook for a reason, partially because of all of the really great deals you get all the time. For example, if you are new, you can go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn, sign up there, make any $5 bet. If that $5 bet wins, say you want to take the Dallas Mavericks minus 1.5 in Game 3 of the NBA Finals, lay $5 on that, you get $200 back in bonus bets. That's 40-1. On a bet that would be like these theoretically minus 110. So go get those odds. Go take advantage of that opportunity at FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you so much for hanging out here on the Locked On Vikings podcast. If you missed it, I lost a contest on the Minnesota Football Party. We had a little season-long betting contest. I got last place. I ate really spicy wings. It is about 11 hours after I ate them, and I am starting to feel the pain. If you would like to see the source of my pain, it was a very fun little trivia game and stuff. Go to the Locked On Minnesota Sports YouTube page. You can't find it on audio, so it is a YouTube thing, and go watch me suffer. I know you're all into that. Moving on here with Twitter Tuesday on the Locked On Vikings podcast. The next question comes from Skull or whatever, who asks, considering everything that has happened this offseason, what are some of the metrics by which we can understand overall improvement or regression of the roster? And included a screenshot of like all the, they replaced Kirk Cousins with JJ McCarthy and Sam Darnold and all that. And boy, isn't that in the eye of the beholder, right? Like, did they get better at defensive line? I don't really think so, because I think the value of Danielle Hunter is not adequately replaced by the aggregate value of like Grenard and Turner and Van Ginkel. Even though I like those players, I liked Danielle Hunter quite a bit more. And I also kind of see defensive line as a disruptor position. You want one animal that can really scare people versus a whole bunch of guys that are like just pretty good. Or there's the analytics term is like a strong link system versus a weak link system, right? Like O-line is a weak link system, right? The worst player on your line is going to have a bigger impact than the best player on your line. And D-line, I think, is the other way around. So anyways, you can super disagree with me on that, though, and say, well, wait, no, they had all their eggs in one basket. Now it's diversified and it's harder to deal with. Sure. And I think you could probably go position by position and just say, do you feel better? But like at quarterback, isn't that an interesting question? Do you feel better about their quarterback situation, right? It's not Kirk Cousins. I would hazard a guess that Kirk Cousins has better stats than the Vikings quarterback room in the aggregate this year, in this short-term moment. So you could say they regressed, but obviously with a plan toward getting that better in the long term and for the foreseeable future, right? That will obviously be worth it if JJ McCarthy turns into our franchise quarterback and is way better. And not to mention that Kirk Cousins has 2 good years left in him. So this was going to have to happen sometime anyways. So how are you judging this, right? You can say, well, yeah, that regressed. But if you ask why, do you really feel that bad about it? I think that's an important factor of the question to ask. So it's very in the eye of the beholder is, I guess, my answer to that question, which may not be satisfying to you, but sorry. Chris asks, how concerned are you about our DT room? Speaking of, because one injury away from starting Jonah Williams or Levi Drake and having one nose tackle on the roster is worrying me. They've got 2 nose tackles in Harrison Phillips and Levi Drake is also a nose. Like he should be over 300 by now. He insists that he is. And then you also have Jonathan Bullard. And I think Jonathan Bullard would probably have the job by default until someone comes and takes it from him. So yeah, you're one one injury away but like you still have like Jerry Tillery coming in on like the base packages and stuff, but one injury away from starting a backup quality player is just kind of the nature of things, right? Like that's their backups. That's precisely what they're for. So that's not really a compelling point to me. That said, I don't love the DT room. I like Harrison Phillips. I like Bullard okay, but I wish he had more serious competition. And I think guys like Jihad Ward, Jonah Williams, we've got like 9 Dean Lowrys on the team, and I honestly don't know which of them are rosterable. So I guess that'll have to sort itself out in camp, and we're just kind of hoping somebody steps up. Smart Guy Ryan says, is it Jerry Tillery season? Arguably the second best DT on the roster and had a good year last year. Yeah, I would not say second best DT on the roster. I would say that is Jonathan Bullard. But that's the guy with the job to beat, right? I would guess that Jerry Tillery is the de facto base D tackle. He's the Dean Lowry right now, and he's got a bunch of other Dean Lowrys coming for his Dean Lowry title. But when we signed him, I watched him, and it was okay. But he's definitely a rotational player. I wouldn't expect like a breakout season from him or anything like that. And considering the first round pedigree, that's like super disappointing, obviously, but that's probably the role that he's like settled into in the NFL, as a guy that like kind of comes in for like a third of the snaps and you forget he's out there, racks up 2 tackles a game and technically is on the stat sheet kind of guy. Rob E asks, what are the mechanics of signing a player from another team's practice squad? So you tell them we would like to bring you to your roster. So you had Rob had a bunch of follow-up questions, and I will get to them. But basically, okay, so I'm the Vikings. I look on the Carolina practice squad, and there's a player that I would like on my 53-man roster. I can go to that player, and I can say, I'm bringing you up to the 53-man roster. I'm signing you. Assuming that player takes that and says yes, which they do not have to. That was one of the follow-up questions. They can say no to that, but nobody ever does. Then they're on my 53-man roster. If you want, you can also say, hey, I would like you to come to my practice squad instead. There's not really a lot of incentive for that because the pay is probably about the same. But sometimes people will do it to like be closer to home or whatever. It's pretty rare to see that happen, but you can also do that. But really, to get a guy off the practice squad in a way that the team can't really do anything about it, you have to give them a spot on your 53-man roster and like actively cut someone else for them. So you got to be really into this guy. And the other thing is that player, if they want, they can say, hey, Panthers, the Vikings just offered me this contract. If you beat it, I'll stay here, but you got to put me on the roster. And sometimes you'll see practice squad elevations that feel super random. And really that's what's going on. Someone tried to poach them and you're trying to keep them in the building. In terms of the follow-up questions, he asks, does the acquiring team have to keep the poached player on the roster all season? No. And this just happened with somebody that I just went over for the Everyman series. He went to the Rams for like 2 seconds and came back, and I'm forgetting who it was. Oh, it was Myles Gaskin. Yeah, Myles Gaskin was on the Vikings practice squad after he got cut from Miami. He went to the Rams for a little bit, to their active roster. He was waived a little later and then came back to the Vikings practice squad. The problem is you don't control that, right? Like you need the Rams to actively cut him again. And we just kind of got lucky that it happened. And now he stays on our roster. Bradley Noor asks, why are there only a limited number of practice squad slots? It feels like we need to cut players that we wouldn't otherwise want to. I don't think so. You got your 53, you have your 16 practice squad slots, you have an international exemption. You're ending up keeping, what is that, like almost 70 players. I think it's 69 players. Nice. Of your original 90. Like if there's not 20 players on your 90 that you're good with cutting, you're not being decisive enough, I think. Remember, it used to be like 9 or 10 max. And then they expanded it with COVID, and they just kept that expansion because having extra depth on special teams and stuff was just nice. And it's not like these facilities and these buildings, as schwanky as they are now, can't support 15 or 5 or 6 more players in the building every day. So that expansion has worked out, I think, but I do think you get to a diminishing return where it's like, look, man, player 75 on the roster like would have been cut before the second preseason game a few years ago. You're not going to miss that guy that much. Jack from St. Paul asks, who is Edge for? Andre Carter, Patrick Jones, Gabe Murphy, etc. Boy, everybody's going to say Gabe Murphy. I might even do that on my roster prediction, although I think I'll probably put him as Edge 5 and keep Patrick Jones. I think Patrick Jones is probably holding it right now in pole position. He's going to be the status quo guy. And then it's on guys like Andre Carter or Gabe Murphy or anybody else to like come in and beat that. But Patrick Jones is a solid rotational player that knows what he's doing, can hold his own, can set the edge, can do everything fine. And that's a difficult thing to go beat if you have major flaws in your own game, which like Andre Carter has potential, fun, but major flaws in his own game. You're never going to pick that guy over the guy that's like a steady Eddie when you're talking about like a depth position, especially when you think about like impact on special teams too. Dr. Bops asks, I keep getting stuck on the idea of tweeners, these dudes who don't fit ideally into a certain position. Flores is big on them on defense so they can fit into different spots. Why don't we see this more on offense? This is a good question. I had never thought about this before, and after taking it out for a second, I think the best answer I could come up with is because the offense has way stricter rules in terms of who can be on the field and how they can align and what they can do. For defense, anyone can go anywhere. Guys can be moving before the snap. Guys can be doing whatever you want. You can have, if you want, you can put a 300-pound guy at free safety, right? Like if you think that's a good idea, you can do that. I don't know why you'd ever do that, but you're allowed to by the rules. Offense, you only have 5 eligible players, right? So that means that there must be 5 players on your team that cannot go downfield on a passing play. So there's no reason for those guys to be fast at all. They can all be big fat guys. So like, of course there's no reason for that guy to be a tweener, right? There are some tweeners in the offensive world. Like I would argue Kyle Juszczyk is a tweener between like a tight end and a fullback type role. You could argue like, these big receivers that are around, AJ Brown is between a tight end, or Darren Waller even between a tight end and a receiver or whatever. Like you can kind of make those. There are 6th O-line types that are kind of tight ends too. Like you can there's kind of some of that overlap, but really because you have to have 5 eligible and 5 ineligible and a quarterback, there's not going to be that much room to like move guys around the formation. Plus the nature of offensive line is so communicative and chemistry is so important that group has to be really static. And they, you can't like move guys around and play with the Swiss Army knives. Got a few more questions. We're getting close to the end of the football questions, so stick around for some silly stuff. Moving on with this Twitter Tuesday episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast. Maurice Morse asks, will the Vikings start J.J. McCarthy in a preseason game? Start him? Good question. Probably, I think J.J. McCarthy will play at least one full game, probably the third one. He'll play the full game. So yes, I would guess that's how that goes down. He'll get kind of the Jaren Hall treatment where he's the QB3. Unless he beats out Nick Mullins, he takes QB2, that'd be great. I'm not really expecting it, and I'm not worried about that either. That's just kind of, he's developmental, like just stick him with the 3s so that you can, if you need to slow him down and fix a footwork thing, you're taking time away from the 3s instead of the guys that are actually going to make the roster. And like disrupting practice that way is valuable, and you kind of mitigate the cost, right? So I'm going to guess he's QB3. I'm going to guess that he plays at least one full game and probably like a lot of the other games. And then you have Nick Mullins. The thing is, I don't think Sam Darnold will play preseason at all, the way the Vikings tend to approach this. Nor will any of the like major starters. Egregious Philbin, that's phenomenal. What a great username. Asks, does Jalen Naylor ever become the player he flashed as a few years ago, or is the story of his professional career basically written? Man, did he flash? I feel like my opinion of Jalen Naylor like diverged a lot from public opinion because I didn't watch that one Packers game live. The one with the slip and slide game where they got blown out in Lambeau. And I guess Naylor really like kind of popped off in that game, but he had one good game. I think he's still like a wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 type. He had a fairly promising OTAs, and then he was hurt. Can't make the club in the tub, right? So I think there's actually a lot of pressure on him to go do something and not lose his job to like Trent Sherfield. Eric the Red asks, what lessons, if any, could Kwesi learn from Rick Spielman? That's a great question because there's a lot of different ways to approach that idea. Like if the two just got together and talked, you'd probably do a lot of talking about Rick Spielman's mistakes. Like the one, if anybody asks Rick Spielman nowadays, his greatest regret as Vikings GM, he would say cutting Daniel Carlson. It was an impulsive move. It was reactive, and he turned out great elsewhere. But really, the problem there wasn't the knee-jerk nature of that reaction. It was the fact that they couldn't uncover the problem with Daniel Carlson that had kind of showed itself from the time between the time he was drafted and the time he showed up to the Vikings. He got together with a kicking trainer who gave him bad advice, basically, and then he was screwed up and he had to get cut to undo that problem. And if the Vikings had a better special teams coordinator, I'm sorry, I have to say it that way, because he did end up not getting renewed at the end of the season in large part because of this fiasco. If they had done better there, then they maybe could have rescued Daniel Carlson themselves and had, what the Raiders have now. That's really the issue there. So the thing is, it's not only just don't be too knee-jerk about cutting players, but be a little bit more proactive about their off-season training regimen. What are they doing with these other guys? And most teams will, the Vikings do allow, JJ McCarthy does it now too. He's got a QB trainer that's working with him, or that worked with him between the draft and now. And in addition to some of the Kevin O'Connell things, and the Vikings have given their blessing for that and all that, but you have to be aware of what that is, so that if it causes a huge problem and it ruins the player, to say, okay, that guy messed you up. Let's go back to the way you were doing things in college. I think that's a great lesson you can learn from Rick Spielman. I think that you could also probably, Kwesi would do well to just copy paste the value charts that Rick Spielman used. Rick Spielman always got really good value in trades, whether you liked that he traded down or not. He always got enough back. Or he was really consistent. I shouldn't say always. He was very consistent about getting enough back. Or if he was going to trade up, he was very consistent about not overspending to do so. Kwesi has struggled with that. I think that would be a lesson you can take from him. And plus, Spielman has 20 years of experience. I'm sure he could dump a whole bunch of wisdom on a guy who's in his third year as GM. Wham Warnold asks, how did you become host of Locked On Vikings? I think I take this one about once a year because it's I don't know. I get asked more than that, so I feel like I should go back to it every once in a while. But as the story goes, I was writing for a website called Purple PTSD. I had been writing there for a couple of years. Unpaid. It was just a blog thing that I did after work. And then I got a call from David Locke himself, and he kind of pitched me on the whole idea of it. You're going to do this daily podcast. At the time, he was like very upfront. He was like, hey, here's how the money works, but you're not going to make a lot of money. This is going to be a daily commitment for not much reward, but we hope it grows. And I did the math on it, and I figured it would be worth my time because it wasn't good. They said, hey, making a Locked On show should only take like an hour. This was before video and before like graphics were in it and before all these other steps. But it was pretty non-involved. It sounded kind of fun, and I would make an extra buck on the side that I didn't really need at the time. And I went, okay, yeah, let's try this. And then I never looked back, and it's grown so much since then. It's truly the best thing that's happened in my career, and I don't think that there's really anything else that's close. Skullchester asks, why do you hate the Tennessee Volunteers? Now, I don't hate them. It's that I don't respect them. And that's a very different thing. And I don't respect them because they have not earned my respect, okay? Hendon Hooker throwing to Jalen Hyatt. People were tricked. They were fooled. I didn't fall for it, and I hope people continue to not fall for it. Andy, okay, it's a bit, all right, relax, but it is mostly because my only exposure to the Tennessee football team is through the draft, and they always put up the most like fraudulent guy you've ever heard of. I hate it. I'm sorry. No, I'm not. I'm not sorry at all. Andy asks, when making a PB&J, do you put the peanut butter on one side and the jelly on the other, or do you put peanut butter on both sides and jelly in the middle? What is wrong with you? Andrew the Hutt asks, I asked my fiance what's going to happen between Darnold and McCarthy, and she said they're going to kiss. What's your take? Odds on smooching. The odds are long, but they're never zero. That's going to be it for this Twitter Tuesday episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast. Thank you so much for hanging out. I will talk to you tomorrow. We'll be back with more Everyman series. Probably some stuff about Dwight McGlothern. And that's the guy that a lot of people asked, is he going to make the team or not? So I'll probably just kind of make that a whole episode. I'll see you then. And as always, Skull.